The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Hey, welcome to Financial Rebellion. We have a fabulous guest in discussion for you today, Carolyn. It's good to see you, and I'm really looking forward to this. We're talking about the unwinding of the U.S.-China trade relationship. It's in the news, and thank heavens we're live, because if we pre-record, by the time we post, everything's changed. So here we go. Okay, right. So let's cover the news first, then we're going to talk about terms of the day. And then we're going to bring in the fabulous Michael Yan. So, Lou, why don't we roll into news? Okay, so you saw it on Financial Rebellion. We had a wonderful discussion about the pesticide liability shield. A wonderful toxicologist said directly on Financial Rebellion, if this goes through, its impact, and the pesticide makers do what they say they're going to do, the impact on fertility will be such that I consider this an extinction level event. And we saw a group of Congress people really war and fight, including Congressman Massey's got a big primary coming up in Kentucky, which is a real litmus test on whether the oligarchs can get whatever they want. It's really the oligarchs versus the people. It's quite extraordinary. Anyway, but the liability shield got pulled at the last minute. I know you feel very relieved, Carolyn, because you've been really helping to fight this.
Yeah, but except that there's still a Supreme Court case. The decision will be handed down by the end of June about whether federal can preempt all the state laws. The other thing is there are a number of states that have these liability shields too. So the fight is not over.
So this war is happening in the courts. It's happening at the state level. It's happening at the federal level. But if it had gotten through in the federal level, it could have just wiped everything. So we're very happy about that. Okay, next story, Lou. This is good news. Okay, one of the things you see is the controversy over data centers is tremendous because there is very aggressive acceleration of these projects all around the world. We just looked at a big one in Utah. It's much more aggressive in the United States than elsewhere. And we just looked at a big one in Utah that says by the time it's fully operational, it expects to use 3 to 4 times more energy than the entire state of Utah uses right now.
There's a fair amount of pushback. Apparently, the big corridor that was planned for Northern Virginia, they've given up on after spending millions of dollars getting ready for it, partly because of the opposition. So it has made a huge difference.
Right. We just had a big cancellation in Northern Virginia that we announced yesterday. Okay, next story. So why do they need all these data centers? They need it for programmable money. And as you know, Solari's been in the lead at the state in trying to put guardrails up on programmable money. One portion of what the federal government is planning on doing is done through the Genius Act, which passed last year. The Treasury issued proposed regulations in February. We're pushing back with comments on their proposed regulation. You can find that link on Solari. And it's interesting, Carolyn, because every time we try and put guardrails up at the state level or now at the federal level, we hear the reasons why people don't want guardrails.
Right.
And as they say, oh, they would never do that. And I was like, well, then they won't mind guardrails, will they? So
and our comment letter may be the only or one of the very few that are consumer facing, talking about transparency and the effect on individual people.
Right. Okay, next story, Lou. So to show you how quickly things are going, the Genius Act passed last year. The other big act in Washington relating to programmable money is the Clarity Act, which is, has been in tremendous negotiation, still continues in negotiation, but Washington indicates those at the middle of the negotiation say it's close. And we see DTC, which basically is a custodian for the registration of 141 trillion financial assets, come out and say they're ready to launch their, their digital token, or moving on to a distributed ledger, with 50 firms, mostly big American domestic firms, but including the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, which I thought was an extraordinary insertion within that 50 group. But it shows you how quickly they're moving on bringing the entire financial markets, the traditional financial markets, onto a distributed ledger. And what does that mean? They can be made into programmable assets, just like stablecoins can make currency into programmable money. So the push for programmable money and using digital technology to make that happen is really going fast. So any comments on DTC?
Well, yeah, DTC holds most securities, most stocks, and that's where the title is in the records of DTC. So this is major, and still you can have direct registration with a lot of stocks. You register with the company that issues the stock, but I don't know how this will affect that, whether that'll disappear or not.
I think there's a lot we don't know. Okay, next story, Lou. Okay, so the trade war is on. We saw the Trump administration begin the trade war with tariffs. We're going to be talking a lot about it now. I just looked for Money and Markets this week on the Salary Report. I just looked at the new import statistics. And if you look at our imports from China, Carolyn, in January and February, they are 50% of what they were 4 or 5 years ago. It's extraordinary. So we've brought that trade down a lot. And if you 4 years ago, China was our #1 source of imports. Today, the #1 source is Mexico and Canada. So this pivot to the Americas continues, although some of the companies that were coming in from China have now moved to Mexico, coming in from Mexico. So that 50% drop that fast is an extraordinary unwinding. And I always say, when you war with China, when the U.S. wars with China, it's like Siamese twins having a fight, right? Because
So
the economic...
I have a question.
What?
Has this adversely affected the stock price of Walmart, which imports a huge amount from China?
I haven't looked at Walmart. We have an investment screen, and I assure you Walmart's not
Well,
approved for the screen. Right. So that's a good question, because they're highly, highly dependent on China, and they're right in the middle of the trade war. So I suspect they're moving a lot of things to Mexico, but I don't know that. Anyway, so we are watching and unwinding, and we know that Xi Jinping and Trump are scheduled to have a summit. It's been postponed once. We'll see what happens. But one of the things we're going to deep dive with Michael today, nobody knows more about this trade war and sort of the heart of what's happening on the ground than Michael Yan. So I'm delighted he could join us from Japan today. So that's our last story, Lou. So let's dive into term of the day. What is the term of the day, Carolyn?
Yes, the term of the day is sanctions. And there are a whole lot of different sanctions. And, we were just talking about tariffs. And I asked on the internet, are tariffs sanctions? And, traditionally, they're part of trade policy, but they've really become a sanction mechanism. So it adds to the list of what can be done with sanctions. And the United States is the primary user of all of these sanctions. And the Trump administration has been deep into that. There are economic and trade sanctions that restrict. There's a target country usually, or a group of countries, and the economic and trade sanctions include embargoes, bans on trade, like the U.S. Embargo on Cuba is the primary example of that for us. There are financial sanctions where there's access is cut off to the global financial system, and we saw that I want to say it was Russia, but one of the big countries was kicked off of the SWIFT system, which means it's very difficult to execute transactions internationally. There are smart sanctions that aim at specific individuals and entities rather than entire economies. And these include asset freezes, if you know about the I guess they call it a blacklist of people who can't fly. That's one type there of the smart sanctions. Anybody on the list will, and programmable money will make that even more possible. But now, as far as I know, the list is sort of a list that maybe airlines or whatever have know who is on that list, and TSA probably, and so if you try to fly, you don't. And somebody recently brought up the question of whether they're going to impose it for train travel, which is interesting. Then there are arms embargoes is another type of sanctions, and the Trump administration has taken positions different from previous administrations on weapon what weapon agreements are entered into. Diplomatic sanctions include kicking the diplomats out of your country. And sometimes that's voluntarily, they stomp away, but that's another type of stomp. Sports sanctions, there are countries that that can't get into the Olympics, for example. There was years ago, South Africa was banned from the UN, but there have been more recent ones. And interestingly, there's something called a secondary sanction, where you sanction a country for doing business with your target. So if anybody, if you say you can't buy oil from Russia, a country in the EU, the country in the EU who buys oil from Russia is therefore a target of the secondary sanctions. So, and who imposes the sanctions? The UN is a majorly involved in sanctions against UN members. As I said, the United States is the most prolific and far-reaching of the issuer of sanctions. The European Union is involved in imposing sanctions, and the United Kingdom through the United States, mainly through the United States and European Union, they sort of joined those sanctions. But as I said, increasingly the tariffs are actually being used as sanctions. So when countries do something that the president or the people in charge, the entities, people, groups in charge don't like, that affects what the
Right. So a tariff is a sanction that makes you money.
right.
Right? It generates revenue. So one of the things.
Is it a tax? I mean, yeah, it's a tax, but it's also used as to raise money, I guess. But although I've never seen anything about how much money we make on sanctions, whether that goes into a block box or a slush fund, I don't know. You probably know that, but.
So it's important to understand that coming out of the financial crisis, that the U.S. sat down as a major effort at Treasury to figure out how to do sanctions on the financial system and managing the financial system. And the dollar syndicate, and the U.S. dollar as reserve currency, had always been remarkably liquid. That was its power. And this sanction regime dramatically changed the liquidity of the US dollar, and that's part of what inspired the whole development of BRICS and China and Russia coming up with alternative payment systems. And so the dollar went from being very powerfully liquid globally to being very sticky. And one way to think of this is this is early programmable money, is what sanctions are, because what programmable money does is it gives you the ability, whether you apply it to assets like the ones that are currently tracked by DTC or the stable coins in the Genius Act. This gives you the ability to bring sanctions down to the individual level in real time, literally for 8 billion people. So, so the drive to programmability started a long time ago, but certainly accelerated with these sanctions. And it's obviously it's made the global trade more and more sticky, and now it's blossomed into a full-blown trade war with the
Right, and
tariffs.
as we've seen, I mean, you have to be careful when you impose sanctions as to whether you're basically getting the people, the target, to enter into a new system to avoid the sanctions and therefore becoming more powerful. And that's what we've seen, as you said, with BRICS.
Right. And what we're going to talk with Michael about is when these kind of wars fight, you end up shrinking the pie for everybody. So, right, the weaker countries especially get hurt. Okay, well, it's a great privilege to bring in Michael Yan. Michael had a successful career in the military, then became a entrepreneur, and then decided to become a war correspondent. And his reach is incredible. He and his wife, wonderful Japanese journalists, travel the world, and they do everything they can to be boots on the ground. And in the process of being boots on the ground, we had the great privilege of them coming and joining us in the Netherlands for a month, and then they traveled around Europe. And it was wonderful because when Michael was in the Netherlands, Carolyn, he would have all sorts of friends and other people. He's widely loved, and so people would show up. The most interesting people would show up in Stavoren, and I got quite an education. So with that, Lou, let's bring in Michael, who comes to us very late in the evening from Japan. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. We're actually near Mount Fuji. Masako and I are out doing a reconnaissance for where to build Kinjiro House. So that you have
wonderful.
That way, when you guys come to Japan, you have a place to stay with us for as long as you want. And so we're out here. I mean, Mount Fuji's right over there. And you can see it if it's daylight.
So before we dive into the trade war, tell us a little bit about Kinjiro House. This is a vision I love.
Yeah, Kinjiro actually is a heroic but actual real figure in Japan. His statues are all over the country, including in. Sorry, I'm looking at the screen instead of the camera. But his statues are all over Japan. He's reading a book and he's walking. But Kinjiro in the 1800s, Ninomiya Sentoku in the 1800s, he saw that a famine was coming. And so he prepared, the people that who listened to him, they prepared for the famine, and none of them starved to death, but many others starved to death. It was a huge famine. And so all the Japanese know who Kinjiro is. And so Kinjiro is like his nickname. But so his statue, if you ever see a statue of a Japanese he's carrying a bunch of sticks and he's reading a book while he's walking, that's Kinjiro. So our idea we've seen the famine coming for years. It's very clear. I've been warning for 6 years. And so, they're setting conditions for this. Like, for instance, in your latest, I read that book actually. Oh, I see that it's right there. You go, and that's an interesting book. But you in your latest Solari report, you're talking about. I haven't looked through it yet because we're traveling this week, looking for a place to build Kinjiro House actually. But you mentioned that you've already made a mapped out where all the destruction has happened to these pipelines, and I'm guessing nitrogenous fertilizer production and that sort of thing. It's quite an effect. It's having an effect here on Japan already as well. But this is something I've warned Japanese for years. If you see Strait of Hormuz get closed for any length of time, you need to stock up on food. And that, not to mention Malacca. And so now, I've publicly warned about this many, many times about Japan and Thailand and others. If you see Hormuz get closed for any length of time, it's getting serious. And likewise, they're clearly going to go for Malacca, to close Strait of Malacca. Strait of Malacca is absolutely, we spent a lot of time in Panama looking at the Canal and the Darien Gap and those sorts of things. Panama is very, very important, especially to the United States. But Malacca, maybe 7 times more important, right, than even Panama. And Panama is strategic. And so we're talking, big boy stuff. That they're clearly lining up the Zionist. That's Panama right there. I'm so familiar with that place. I can just glance at it. But I've been through that canal quite a few times. But actually one day last year, they let Masako actually open one of the locks. They let us into the control tower. We really have seen Panama. Let's put it that way. But when it comes to Malacca, clearly we're getting into a position to close that. Warming relations with Indonesia. Paul Wolfowitz used to be the ambassador to Indonesia, and I spent, actually, believe it or not, significant time with Wolfowitz, and he used to tell me stories about Indonesia. And anyway, Indonesia is the biggest Muslim country in the world, or there's more Muslims there than any other country. So they don't have good relations with Israel, but they have good relations with the United States. And we've just entered into a military agreement with them, that Indonesia, that gives us overflight rights. And actually, the country that Indonesia is closest with is Japan, by far. No, hands down. I mean, Indonesia and Japan are, they basically love each other, like Japan and Taiwan and in Thailand as well. But and that's because in World War II, Japan, they liberated Indonesia from the Dutch. And that's why actually Jakarta, the capital today, is named Jakarta. It used to be named Batavia when the Dutch had it, and then the Japanese came and kicked the Dutch out, and it became Jakarta. Anyway, the bottom line is that they're clearly, the United States, let's say the Zionist oligarchical structure, is clearly going and heading in the direction to close Malacca. If they do that, and if they can spark a war between Argentina and Brazil, which I think they're lining up to do. We went down there and looked at that about a year and a half ago, and I think that they're, because if you want to, I think they want to famine China, right? I think the Zionists want to basically cast a famine spell on China. If you're going to do that, you need to close Hormuz. You need to close Suez. I would close Turkish Straits if I were doing it, and I would close Malacca for sure, and at least have control over Panama. But then you need to cut them off from Brazil as well. The food supply coming from Brazil and a few other places, and they're clearly going for it. And so right now, I think in the future we'll see Argentina will probably go for Malvinas. When you're in Buenos Aires, you see signs all over the place. The Malvinas there's that island off to the lower right-hand side there is Malvinas. That's the Falklands, right? So I think they're going to go for Falklands. I think Argentina is going to go, Falklands is also called Malvinas. I think they're going to go for that. And at some point they're going to go for, I think there's going to be a war with Brazil. I just smell it. I don't have any proof of that, obviously, but there's a corridor, a bioceanic corridor that's under construction between Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, and Chile. Now, and Masako and I went to Argentina and actually got on a little Chinese train that they're already building there. Anyway, not to go into that, but and Brazil has good relations with China, and Chile has good relations with China. Paraguay does not have good relations with China. Argentina has strong relations with China and Israel, very strong. And Paraguay has good relations with Israel as well. But the fight down there is between Zionists and China, right? Just like in Panama, it's between Zionists and China. And so in Argentina, it's between Zionists and China. And so what you're seeing here is that I think they're going to spark a war with Brazil to take control of that corridor. Anyway, not to go into the details.
Okay, so let me back you up, because you're going fast into the future. I just want everyone to understand how important the Straits of Malacca is. So the biggest trade throughput in the world is the South China Sea, and the Straits of Malacca is essentially the entrance from the subcontinent into the whole area up through China. So you've got Vietnam, you've got Japan, you've got Taiwan, you've got and you've got countries that are bringing in huge amounts of oil, and they're bringing huge amounts of oil in, including from the Middle East. And in fact, a lot of Iranian oil has been coming in through the Straits of Malacca. So if you cut off the Straits of Hormuz and the Straits of Malacca, don't you essentially shut down Middle Eastern oil into China?
Not all of it, but enough. And food and all kinds of other things, right? And so, yeah, I mean, cutting Malacca is, I mean, it's epic. I mean, it's WMD class stuff. And keep in mind, Malacca has been important since mid 1500s, 1550-ish. It was starting to get important, but certainly by the 16 and 1700s. And that's a whole fascinating history there in Malacca. But so the British have tried to stop any canal being built across the Kra Isthmus in Thailand for centuries now, right? And others have tried to stop that as well. But now China, I did the first sort of reconnaissance on Kra Isthmus, about the idea of building a canal there in 2014. Now, the idea of building a canal there goes back to at least minimum 1667.
But aren't they talking about a railroad land bridge instead of a canal?
They're going back and forth on this. I mean, let's see what they end up coming up with. But the land bridge is part.
Yeah,
Yes.
Michael, one of the things that I know that you've talked about is who actually has control to shut off things like these, that everything. You say they will shut this down. They've shut that down. Who is they? I mean, as I understand it, like Iran doesn't have control. It isn't the one shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. Is that right?
Right. And keep in mind, in 2025, I was publishing in writing in very clear words that I thought the U.S./Israel would close Hormuz and blame Iran. Now, it sounded crazy in 2025, but I was writing it clear words. And I thought that's what has happened. And because, I understand what this crocodile is doing, and as a crocodile hunter or alligator hunter, I used to hunt alligators, but crocodiles behave in the same way. I just kind of see what they're going to do. It's not always deductive. It's inductive based on what their goals are. One of the goals is global depopulation of the Zionist structure, the Epstein class, right? That oligarchical constellation of people, they are clearly going for a global depopulation, which will include those chemicals you were talking about earlier, the glyphosates and all that stuff. That includes the food reduction. That includes knocking out the energy fertilizers and all those sorts of things. That's all about population reduction. This has been going on for a long time, and they've made a lot of progress in doing this. Now, also, those data centers that you were talking about, as population, their goals are, as population reduction unfolds, is to get us into what Catherine's been warning about for, I don't even know when Catherine started warning about this, but getting us into a digital prison, right? And so that along with physical prison, then you've got it. So you've got a much reduced number of, the population is reduced in number and dumbed down, actually. And because dumbing down the population has been an ongoing intergenerational goal, and it's working. And so the dumbing down the population, reducing the population, and controlling the remnant is what they're up to. But there's other people that aren't going along with this. For instance, the Chinese, they don't want to be depopulated, obviously. Russians don't want to be depopulated. So, I mean, there's different groups that even as we're talking about depopulation and reducing these sorts of things, there are a lot of people out there building other infrastructure, right? You've got the Chinese.
So let me
go ahead.
Let me just jump in, because China just did something remarkable, and they've been very slow to respond to sanctions. But China announced that the U.S. put on 2 new sanctions related to Iran approximately a week ago. China announced not only were they not going to respect them, but they were ordering their refining companies that if they did respect them, that would be a violation of Chinese law. So China is basically putting in reverse sanctions. And now what they're saying, and I wanted to check this with you, is that any company that transverses or uses the Panama Canal is now banned from Chinese ports around the world. And China controls an enormous amount of ports around the world. So this is really big. So if you could explain, what did China just do, and what do you think it means? Right.
As you know, Maersk is significant in all global, logistics. Maersk and MSC are, so they two of the companies that China directly threatened were MSC and Maersk, who both have big stakes down in Panama, well, all over the world, actually. And actually, that's why Masako and I were recently up in Denmark. We were up there specifically because that's where the Danish Straits is, and Maersk, right? And ultimately, I think somebody will go for Denmark as well, and the Danish Straits, and possibly Maersk, because old school, when you really go big time old school war, you take their whole fleet, right? You take all their boats if you can get them, and their ports. I mean, this is big time monopoly, right? Maersk, doesn't have its own navy, right? Maersk is a basically naked out there at sea. The Danish Navy is not really going to do much for it. So this is going to be interesting how this plays out. But Maersk obviously has been, well, for those who are tracking closely, Maersk has been making a big play down in Panama. In fact, I got word many months ago now, maybe 6 months, I don't remember, but that Maersk was looking at trying to get hold of those two ports on either side in the Pacific. That's where Balboa Port is, and Cristobal on the Caribbean side. Those two key ports in the Panama Canal. Those are the two most important. And Maersk wanted to buy those. They haven't succeeded. But at the end of the day, this is a big war, and it's growing. There's no.
So the last month, Maersk's stock is down 12.67%. I'm just going to go check Walmart. So we'll see how long. Yeah. So if you're a company in the middle of this, you can really get hit hard.
Oh yeah. I mean, you could lose your capital. I mean, they can take your ships. What's there to stop countries from just taking your ships and painting a new sign on it? Nothing.
Here's the thing. This shows you that there is a meta control higher than the U.S.-China war. So Walmart is up 15.74% year to date. And in the last month, they're up 5.27%. So they haven't been touched.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. That tells you, there's another layer above this.
Well,
Right,
and think
Michael?
about the opportunities for insider trading. I mean,
it's like there's always another layer. You're like, okay, I'm out of this IMAX and I'm cutting my way out, and now you're in another one. Yeah.
So here's the thing, because you were the one who really helped me understand this. If you look at this war, so we have a China-U.S. trade war, but if you look at the countries in the global south, particularly the ones who import a lot of energy, we're talking about famine everywhere, not just in China, but this could be famine throughout the world.
Definitely.
Is that
I mean,
correct?
this can go, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, shoot right on over to Myanmar. Thailand, even. I know Thais don't like to hear it, but I've been warning Thais. I used to have an office in Chiang Mai. I've been in every province in Thailand. I'm very familiar with Thailand. Thailand is very important. It's a hyphen in Indo-Pacific security, right? That's why the United States spent so much. Anyway, and Thailand creates a lot of food, but Thailand is very vulnerable because it has a lot of inputs to create that food. Like, 4 or 5 years ago, I flew over to Thailand from Europe to meet with Abhisit. He's a former prime minister, and I called him up. I said, hey, I'm somewhere in London or something, and I want to fly over. And so I flew over, and we had tea, and I was warning, this is 4 or 5 years ago, that, if we see something like Turkish Straits and Hormuz and others get closed, you only create in Thailand 8% of your nitrogenous fertilizers. 92% at that time is imported. Now, rice, which is a major export, obviously, in Thailand, is basically a nitrogen vacuum, right? So you have to have those inputs. You're simply not going to produce that rice. So it's not like, Thailand is a bottomless well of rice. It has to have massive amounts of inputs. And so these things that we're seeing, for instance, with Strait of Malacca and Hormuz and whatnot, they have effects on Thailand. And one of the things I warned Abhisit about, his nickname is Mark, is if we have famines in Asia, for instance, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, they'll come right over to Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai, and all over the place. They'll be right in Thailand, right? And you won't be able to stop them.
Right.
I mean, and remember, famines spread like fire. Famines, they tend to spread because people leave where they're at to go get food. The people who can leave do leave, and then that place can go into famine too, especially when they're intentional. This is intentional. So this is not like it's going to be temporary. Many of the famines in Japan, for instance, that volcano over there, Fuji, erupted in 1707 and caused a big famine in Edo, in Tokyo, right? And so a lot of famines like that, they can be severe and they can be very quick. They can occur very quickly, but then they tend to go away and they tend to be limited. Those are those quick sort of famines. But the one that we're going into now is intentional. It's a slow type famine. These are often by far the worst. But this one, when this is over, we're seeing a strategic reduction in the ability to actually even produce food. So, I mean, the ability to produce the food just won't be there. And so there won't be enough nutrition, and so there'll be starvation. It's pretty easy. On one level, it's quite easy to analyze. You've got people knocking out pipelines, like when they knocked out Nord Stream and Groningen. You know, Masako and I were over in Europe when those things happened. We were warning about Nord Stream over and over and over. And the last time that we went to BASF in Nord Stream, we were there 14 days before Nord Stream was blown up. We were warning about it. I told you I had an iPad that I bought just to track the flows through Nord Stream. So there was a website where you could track how many cubic meters per second of natural gas were flying through the pipelines. And then they went to zero one night or one day. And anyway, we know what happened. Nord Stream got blown up and the pipelines are gone. And later they shut down Groningen. You know, I think when I was with you over in Netherlands, I think I was with you when they blew up that nuclear plant in Bavaria. The German government blew up the nuclear plant and invited people to watch. I mean, they're intentionally. Today we were with an intelligence analyst here in Japan, and we were he's somebody you would love to talk with. But we were and he watches your stuff. So, I mean, his English is perfect. But we were talking today about, you know, the nuclear plants here in Japan. I mean, those need to all be online, right? But there's in Fukushima, there's something strange about the whole Fukushima thing. When Fukushima, you know, when the tsunami came and the nuclear reactor allegedly blew up, I mean, I was over in Afghanistan. I literally got on an airplane from Afghanistan. It took like 3 or 4 days because I was out in the boondocks. I was actually on the Iranian border area in Afghanistan. So I ended up in Japan, right? I mean, I literally flew to Japan for that. That's how important that I thought that was. And now, you know, you can see how important it actually is. I mean, they're trying to knock out all these nuke plants, all the coal-fired plants, everything, and basically just reduce the population at the end of the day.
So I believe the primary goal of what the U.S. is doing vis-a-vis Iran is to lower the supply and raise the cost of energy to China. So in 2023, the Chinese 10-year bond, sovereign bond, the yield dropped through the U.S., which means China has a lower cost of capital. And, you know, if you look at what China's been doing with building nuclear plants and other things, you know, their cost of energy is coming down, down, down. And so those are two key components of, you know, basically trade war with China. Who's got the lower cost of capital? Who's got the lower cost of energy? Who's got the lowest cost of labor? And so it looks to me, you know, Iran is a proxy war. You're simply trying to dramatically raise the price of energy to China, and that's at the very heart of the trade war. Would you agree with that?
Partially. I mean, for instance, keeping Russia and Germany separate has been a goal for several centuries, or a couple centuries, you know, by the British. Like cutting Nord Stream, you know, is a big deal with, you know, keeping those two separate. I mean, that goes down into the Halford Mackinder and all that sort of stuff, but not to go into that. But I think that what they really want to do ultimately is reduce the number of Chinese on planet Earth. I mean, they're clearly going for it. And, you know, with what they're doing now, if they close Malacca and they keep it, and I say I should have, Carolyn, brought that up. I think especially the Zionist architecture, that oligarchical structures, whoever they are, it's easy to close Strait of Malacca. That's child's play. I mean, that's as easy as closing the Panama Canal, which is child's play. And so, I mean, that's like a nothing sandwich. But there'd be endless ways to close it. I mean, 100, 200, 300. But one would just be to mines or even threats of mines. You could just say, hey, there's mines out there. Submarines, whatever, missiles, drones. There's so many ways to shut it. I mean, it's not really relevant to talk about the many ways. But the fact is, it can be shut. and it can be shut for, semi-permanently, and for, let's say, a long length of time. At the end of the day, I think we're going to end up seeing famines, and I think it's going to cause a lot of human osmotic pressure, the push and the pull of migration, which is something Masako and I have been warning about quite a lot when we're in places like Darien. We were saying specifically, we think that eventually we're going to see famines in places like Darien Gap and others where United Nations and others have set up their invasion architectures. In other words, the flow of the migration of migrants. Once you get famines going, it's game on. I mean, they will be, they can come by Camp of the Saints style by ship. They can come, right up the Mississippi River by ship. And I don't think our government will stop them. I think they'll actually welcome them in. Likewise with places like Ireland. I think, the bit by bit, that the globalist, Mr. Globalist, as you call him, they're looking at these places like pieces of real estate. Some trillionaires like, I'd like to have nice Ireland without the Irish people, right? And there's been a push to depopulate Ireland.
So
go ahead.
So this group always does, so we just published a big wrap-up last year on Plunder, but they're always looking to do these things as a for-profit enterprise. So you put the expenses, I'll give you an example. In the Middle East, you have the taxpayers pay for clearing the land, but you then privately take the oil and gas, you take the water, you take the land, and then you have the taxpayers pay for you to fix it up under your ownership. So it's a public-private partnership where the public gets the costs and you get the equity upside. And it's really a plunder model. So I'm assuming if they're going to do this in the South, they're going to want to plunder as much as possible in connection with it.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
It's basically the company town model grande, right? I mean, it's company country. I mean, it's really the same model. I mean, how many company towns have there been on planet Earth? It must be in the tens of thousands, I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start. I mean, there's so many, the company towns. Go ahead.
Oh, so China, we got a question from a listener. China owns so much farmland in the U.S. What's happening with that? If the Siamese twins are going to sort of lower their interdependence, how are we going to handle the fact that Chinese owns a lot of farmland, including around U.S. military bases?
Yeah,
do you know what's happening there?
What bets do we have that we see? Each side doing a lot of nationalization there. I mean, there's a lot of ways to play this chessboard, and how it's going to play out, I don't know. But as you can imagine, there must be a lot of talk about just saying, "Hey, we're just going to." They'll make some excuse to do it. Of course, usually it's some atrocity or something like that, and say, "Well, we're just going to take your stuff," right? I mean, that's how these things go, and that's how bit by. Go ahead.
Well, when you were in Europe, you were touring. I know you were touring Denmark. You toured the Netherlands. You were up in Sweden. What did you learn? So we've been very interested in what they've done in Europe to try and shut down the farmers. Europe has an incredible, and the Netherlands certainly, population of amazing and highly productive farmers. And they've literally, while they're destroying the nuclear plants, they're making war on the farmers too. So what did you see in Europe about what's happening with the farmers?
The same that we see in Canada and the United States and Australia. And I mean, it's the same story everywhere with a different accent. I mean, it's, like the book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. This is like the attack on food supply with 1,000 faces. You go to Germany and they talk about carbon dioxide. As you know, if you go to Netherlands, they talk about nitrogen, Stickstoff, right? And so it's just fascinating how it's the same morphology of the fight. They just change a few details. And so that's what's happening. They're reducing the food production permanently and replacing the population. This is an old game. Nothing we're talking about is new. Right. Not even vaguely new. I mean, everything that we've talked about has been going on for centuries. It's just that now more people can understand it, and those who use the internet to actually study and not just play games or something, you can now piece things together that were harder to piece together in the old days. Plus, we can get on airplanes now and go see many things. But Europe, when we were up in Sweden and Norway and Denmark recently, one of the you asked what important things we learned. One of the very important things we learned was about the U.S. basing agreements between Finland and Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. More than 40 U.S. bases up there, and they've got a lot of you've got the ability to do whatever you want with those bases. So I mean that's we could easily close the Baltic. We could easily take Denmark, right? And Denmark right there.
Right.
I mean, then you got the Danish Strait and Maersk. And by the way, United Nations has a huge headquarters building right there on the Danish Strait. We went there and looked at it, and it's just a massive. I mean, they're everywhere. They're everywhere that's strategic. If you go down to Panama Canal, where their headquarters is where our U.S. Army South headquarters used to be. The UN headquarters in Panama, which is their sort of theater headquarters for that part of the world, is in Panama. It's in Panama City. It's in a place called Ciudad del Saber, City of Knowledge. It's the former U.S. Army South headquarters, and we should kick them out of there. And it's right next to. I say we should kick them out of there. Who's we at this point? As our mutual friend up in Sweden says, who's we? Good question. But the United Nations is not we, that's for sure. But where their headquarters is in Panama is right beside Miraflores locks, which is the first locks as you come in from the Pacific. And the railroad's right there, and you from the UN headquarters area in Panama City, you can see the China Bridge that's being built. You can see it in the distance. You can see that area where that fire was under the Thatcher Ferry Bridge recently. The Bridge of the Americas is the new name. You can see where that fire was, and what I'm getting to is they build their places in strategic locations. Likewise, by the way, Israelis are squirting out to important places. They're squirting out to Argentina, Philippines. They're squirting out. The place that they're squirting out to in Thailand, there's a couple major places, is Pai, which is a strategic place that the Japanese occupied in World War II. And they're also going to a place called Koh Phangan and Koh Tao. I've been to all three of these places. And for instance, in the news today in Thailand, there's like 7,000 people on Koh Tao. But if you know much about Koh Tao and what's going on with the idea that the Chinese would like to build what's called the Funan Techo Canal from the Mekong River through Cambodia, that will allow them to access from the Mekong River into the Gulf of Thailand and then shoot right over to that land bridge if that's what they build on Kra Isthmus. Well, anyway, where the Israelis are building their little colony there is, and the Thais are getting ready to kick them out. But that's strategically located right there in a great place where you could influence that route right there. Plus, there's energy in the Gulf of Thailand.
Right.
Likewise, the Israelis are looking at going into like Baja California. So I mean, they're going to places of interest.
So let me bring things to domestically, because one of the issues that's happening politically in America is if you look at the polls, we're coming into a congressional election in November. And if you look at the polls say at this point it's a remarkable way, it's swung dramatically, that the Democrats are going to take both the House and the Senate. And yet there's a belief that if there's a war going on, the Republicans can delay or prevent the elections from happening. And so the lack of popularity of this war, the unpopularity of this war, could have a dramatic impact on what happens next. Any thoughts on whether or not you think the Republicans will be able to use war as an excuse to kill or stop the elections?
I think that they will, actually. I think we've crossed the Rubicon on these sorts of things. We're beyond the point where they actually care what anybody thinks. I mean, as you can see, with so many things that are happening, whether it's the chemicals that are openly being put on the crops now, still pushing the death jabs and these sorts of things, just going to war with Iran and lying about everything under the sun. which is, obviously, and the clear genocides that's going on in, Gaza, and just bragging that they're going to build, resorts over there, not to mention Lebanon, of course. It's clear that, by the way, I know this, for a lot of people, they can't see this, but there's a small percentage that can see it. But the Zionists clearly, they will kill a lot of Israelis in a heartbeat. And any Israelis that are in the way, they will absolutely do it. They did it on October 7th, right? And I know people lose their minds and say, well, no, that was Hamas or whatever. It's like, I totally get it. That was a setup. It was so obvious. It was as obvious as that fake thing at the Trump press thing, I mean, it's like,
Well, Gaza, if you look at the plan of Gaza, it's a prototype for programmable money, right? They're going to swap your land for a token, and it's implementing programmable money. So I've always said it's a method. One question we got is on Greenland. So Trump has constantly made overtures to Denmark that he wants to buy or own Greenland. What do you think? Where do you think that sits?
Well, there's going to be a fight over that northern corridor, and it's been building over generations as well. The Russians first did their, nonstop flight over the North Pole in 1937. It's been going on since before that. Actually, somebody went over in a one of those airships in 1926, I think. But the airplane 1937. They've been going for it ever since, and because when you look at a projection of the Earth from the North Pole down, I've got a beautiful map like that in our library in Japan. The Earth looks very different when you look at the North Pole as the center of our world. It looks very, very different, and you can see why they're going to fight over the North Pole. I mean, there's just no chance that this ends without a fight over not just the North Pole, but the North.
Well, you dramatically shorten the trade routes. So if Chinese shipping and Russian shipping can use the northern route, you've got a tremendous, again, you lose control of the land bridge, but they get a tremendous advantage. Again, getting back to the cost of energy and the cost of capital, right?
Right. And I wish we could get Masako to come on here. She's crawling behind me so she doesn't come on the camera. I love Masako. She's unbelievable. But I mean, they're clearly, the Chinese actually, as I think you actually may have brought this up when we were in, the Chinese have actually already sent ships through the northern route from China to Rotterdam. I mean, they've actually done it. So they've done it several times now, right? So I mean, they want to get that northern. Chinese obviously want to open it up. Russians want to open it up. We want to open it up. Anybody that has any, very serious trade that they can do at a big level, they're going to want that open, and they're going to want freedom of passage.
Right. So one of the many things I've learned from you and Masako that I just love was the concept of the dog king. And I would love, before we go, if you would tell the story of the dog king, and because I think it's so appropriate to helping us understand what's going on.
Yeah, Dog King. Actually, Caligula's horse too, where he allegedly made a senator out of his horse. Because he was mocking the Senate. He's like, "You worthless senators! My horse is a senator." That I don't know if it really happened. All these, every time I really dig down and try to find the truth of it, it kind of fades to gray. Like maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But the idea of a dog king is definitely true. And actually, some of this happened up between Norway and Sweden, and more your neck of the woods over there. And and it's happened in Africa too. It's basically one king kills or runs off another king, and he literally makes like a dog as the king, and an actual dog, and a crown with an interpreter and that sort of thing. So what it does when you make a dog as a king, it demoralizes the subjects. Like, that's not my king, that's a dog. Well, that's your king. Your king is a dog, and you're a dog too, and it also emboldens your enemies, right? So it's a demoralization and on one side, and it emboldens your enemies on the other. So that's just one of the mechanisms that they use with all these, people that we see that are, senators and congressmen and that sort of thing. which is they've basically installed a lot of Caligula's horses and dogs into office that they shouldn't even be let into the door, right? But this is normal, and there you go, Caligula's. When did I publish that? Was that in 2022?
22, 22, 22.
Yeah.
And you know, it's an interesting
forgot about that.
tactic. I want to come back to the piece we had at Soleri. So we had a wonderful researcher, Corey Lynn of Corey Diggs, sit down and we went through all the different places where energy production, refining, and transportation had been interfered with, as well as trade bottlenecks since the beginning of the year. So starting on January 1st, we looked at all incidents. And the thing to understand, Michael, and I want the audience to really appreciate this, these are not just in the Ukraine and in the Middle East. Clearly, that's major, you know, in those two wars, but it's far beyond those two war locations. You're talking about sabotaging, interrupting, and shutting down capacity globally. This is a world war, and it's no accident that there is a real effort to get control of the energy markets, to raise the cost of energy to a variety of players. And in the middle of this, the U.S. has now become the #1 leading exporter of oil and gas in the world, particularly because of our LNG capacity.
Right. Now, keep in mind, but the U.S. population is also targeted by our predatory government, right? I mean, as you will. I mean, you talk about this all the time. And one thing that we shouldn't, one thing that we shouldn't leave off the discussion here is weather modification. Now, you know, some people roll their eyes, but you guys know extremely well this is very real. And, you know, people like Dane Wigington are shouting at the skies about this stuff. And, but, you know, and he hates the term chemtrails, and I see why he hates that term, because it gets, you know, it gets bottled up into the idea of everything's a conspiracy theory. But he talks about, you know, stratospheric injection and those sorts of things. Basically, weather modification is quite real. It's been real since before we were born. It was going on before any of us were born. And so, and now they've brought it up. There you go, geoengineering. Watch.org. That's Dane Wigington. He's worth watching. And you can see he gets fired up because not enough people are paying attention.
The reports from Iran are that now that they've taken out the THAAD installations and radar, that the drought's suddenly over and they're getting plenty of rain. Do you think that has connected to shutting down the weather warfare temporarily in the Middle East?
You know, I wonder. I don't know what the truth is on that. I just don't know. But you know, I should call up Dane actually and ask him what he thinks about it, and some others that are actually in that region. Dane's not.
I'd love to know if you find out.
Yeah, that's quite interesting.
I would love to know. Yeah.
Now, you know,
and
one of the things about the Iran. Go ahead.
One of the things I wanted to mention, now that Iran has taken the position that they can target a U.S. military installation no matter where it is, I think China is now taking the position the same, that if you have a U.S. military installation anywhere around Asia, you know, you're fair game if this war accelerates.
Oh, definitely. And, you know, if they want to do it with deniability, plausible deniability, I mean, these drones, I mean, the thing is you can just say, well, there's some, you know, terrorist group out there and they launched a few drones and took out your aircraft carrier. I mean, it's you know, it's reached that level. Look what the Houthis have done. I mean, the Houthis, you know, I think what we're going to see is all the countries on the Arabian Peninsula are scheduled for demolition. I think, you know, I call them the 1922 synthetic countries. Not that they were all, you know, not that they all came in existence in 1922, but you know, a covey of them did, like Kuwait and Bahrain, UAE, Saudi Arabia. You know,
okay.
Go ahead.
So we have one more minute, so I'm going to interrupt you. I first of all, I want to thank you for coming on, and I want you to thank Masako for letting you come on, because I know you guys are busy. Would you just tell us how we can follow you, find you on the internet and on social media? Just give us 30 seconds of how to find Michael and Masako online.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I'm on Substack under my name, and there you go. And also I'm on X there. And so I'm on X and Substack. and pretty regularly. And then, you know, I do a few interviews with heavy hitters like yourself. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. I see we only have 30 seconds, so I really appreciate it.
Well,
I was very excited when you said
well,
you invited me on.
I can't say that you've cheered us up, but if you haven't
I'm
figured it
still
out, no
happy.
matter where
I don't
you
know
are,
why.
well, there's no reason to lose our state of amusement, right? We have the victory. So, if you haven't thought about where your high quality food is going to come from and how you're going to organize it, now would be a good time to get going, right, Michael?
Yep, and that's why we're looking right
Good.
here, actually, in this area of Japan.
Right. Good water, good food. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on Financial Rebellion. Carolyn and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye, Carolyn.
Bye-bye.
Tom Rogers, medical doctor,
What kind of a doctor are you?
family practice.
Family practice. And we're going to talk about the things that you saw during the COVID era, if you like.
Okay.
So tell us about it.
Well, when COVID first presented back in early 2020, I would have to say preface this by saying that as a family doctor, I do a lot of functional medicine, meaning I try to find the cause of something rather than just prescribe a pill. I've been practicing 38 years, and right when COVID started, I knew something was really different about this disease, which presented as a flu-like syndrome. And I knew it was much worse than things we'd seen previously, and was very skeptical about some of the things they were saying about it. And through experience, I bet I treated close to 10,000 patients with COVID, so anywhere from mild to severe. And there were so many different crazy things that happened that it made me realize that this wasn't anything that we had seen before. It wasn't really natural. And all the controversies about where it came from, did it come from the wet market, did it leak out of the lab? You kind of formed your own ideas. And COVID became quite polarizing, where it destroyed families because of beliefs as to where it came from, what you should do, and then the vaccine comes along. And it further polarized people, and certainly I saw a lot of vaccine injuries along the way. So this whole 3-year thing was like a nightmare, but in my case as a doctor, it was really almost like fulfilling a calling, because it needed to be treated, and doctors were not treating COVID. And that's really how I think I got involved, and I realized that, hey, this is your real purpose in being a doctor. I come from a medical family. My dad was a surgeon, my brother's a surgeon, many people in my family are physicians, and so
So that's interesting. So what did, because you obviously felt like it was a bit of a not as they were saying it is, scam, if you like.
well, yeah, I knew it was something bad because it did. I saw it kill people for sure, friends.
You actually witnessed people dying from COVID?
Yes.
At
Yes.
home or in hospital?
Home. Both.
Because we have not had anybody come on this bus that knows that anybody that died of COVID at home.
Well, when you say COVID,
Right.
but it was not common that they would die, but certainly in my experience, people died with a severe respiratory illness.
Which
Now,
people have been doing for years anyway, right? With flu.
exactly.
250,000 people in the UK, whatever, they die of flu.
Yep, they do.
That's normal.
And mostly it was elderly people,
Right.
obese people, people with low vitamin D. But I did see a couple of outliers that really surprised me that died. One was a close friend. But the thing about one of the lessons my dad taught me as a physician, when you're not sure what to do something. And what struck me was when people were going into the ERs with respiratory problems, they were saying, you know, there's nothing we can do. They test positive for COVID. The tests were very unreliable, so who knows, you know. But anyway, so I felt we had to do something, and there's certainly protocols, and you know, I researched it a lot. I went with the frontline doctors, and I started treating it, and the treatment was very effective, especially at first hydroxychloroquine. I used that. I even got a letter from my state medical board asking me why I was using hydroxychloroquine, and I printed off some studies, sent it in to them, and they cleared me. In other words, my license to practice medicine was being threatened because I was treating with something that was outside the box. And then ivermectin came along. It was even a better drug to cover it with. And of course, these medicines work for other things as well. So we used a lot of ivermectin. We used a lot of high-dose vitamin C. I was in people's houses delivering oxygen, using IV vitamin C. So there were a lot of different protocols that we used for it, but there's no doubt in my mind that it was a severe, whatever it was, there was a severe respiratory illness that we haven't seen before. We see a lot of flu every year, which we can treat as well, but so it was a very polarizing thing. And you know, then if somebody, we'd do anything we could to keep somebody out of the hospital, because people went in the hospital, they would give you this drug called remdesivir that could shut down your kidneys. They would put you on a ventilator, and I had many people that I knew that had their lungs blown out by the respirator because they were using too high pressures, so they had bilateral chest tubes. Then they had to get on dialysis and kind of circling the drain, and most of them died. Very few got off the ventilator.
Right, we were seeing that. The COVID shots, what did you think of the COVID shots, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson Johnson?
I was always skeptical of the vaccine from the very get-go. You know, none of us got the vaccine.
You're talking about the COVID shots?
The COVID shot, right. Yeah. None of my family got it. I did not recommend it.
So all the doctors, scientists, people, the family that you come from, none of them got the COVID shot?
No, some of them did.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Some of them did. And I won't say who, but one of my very close relatives, physician, couldn't wait to get it. And 5 days after he took the first Moderna, he starts coughing up blood, calls me, and he's younger and healthier than me. And I said, well, let's get an x-ray. Got an x-ray, his whole left lower lobe was whited out. I thought he had cancer. Get a CAT scan, and fortunately it's not cancer, it's just hemorrhagic pneumonia. So there's no doubt in my mind that the shot caused that.
Does he think the shot caused that?
Well, he didn't get another one.
Okay.
So he was kind of, you know, skeptical that the shot caused it, you know, being a physician. But I convinced him that I thought it probably was, because there was no other reason for that. I had one patient, healthy 50-year-old gentleman, who received, I don't know if it was the Pfizer or the Moderna, but 1 hour after he got the vaccine, he's having a grand mal seizure. 6 hours after taking the vaccine, he was on a ventilator for 5 days. He survived. But countless stories of vaccine reactions.
Do you see any in children, and I know you're not a pediatrician, but do you see any in the younger ones?
You know, I don't see a lot of younger kids, so I'm really can't really comment on that. I certainly discouraged it for anybody. The thing about the vaccine, it became even more polarizing for the medical community, because probably 99% of physicians kind of follow the orders from the higher ups, like the government, and the CDC, the FDA. So it became quite polarizing for doctors. You almost were scared to say much as a physician. As a matter of fact, I do a weekly podcast called The Common Sense MD, and we've been doing it for over 7 years weekly. I take up various topics that of interest to the general population. And during that time, I found out that censorship is a real thing. I was censored off all the YouTube, Instagram, taken off 3 times because of certain language that I used. You know, and I was very tactful about it too. I knew I was going to get kicked off if I, told what I knew about what I had seen with COVID. So
what about RSV? Because
RSV.
That's the new thing at the moment, and I know you're not able to talk about children and babies, but they are already venting babies.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that in the way that
adults
they're pushing the RSV?
Yeah, I don't agree with it.
Yeah.
Even on adults, no, I don't agree with the RSV vaccine. I'm not a pediatrician, so again, I can't speak for
but they're pushing
pediatric.
on the oldies as well.
Yeah, well, mostly my population is an adult population, but I certainly haven't recommended a COVID shot or an RSV shot to anybody. As a matter of fact, I'm skeptical now about most vaccines. I'm 69, I'll never take another vaccine. I haven't taken the flu shot for years. Now, I used to push flu vaccines on people because I told them that they needed to get it. It's the narrative that we're indoctrinated with in medicine. And through the years, I had many patients that told me, every time I get the flu vaccine, I get the flu, or it makes me sick. And then I would say, well, there's no evidence of that. So it's purely coincidental. Now I believe them. So I certainly don't push the flu vaccine anymore.
Are there any vaccines that you think are good?
I'm not sure about some of the pediatric vaccines,
Well, that's not your job, but
that's not my job.
What you do
as an adult,
you think, oh, you've got to get this.
I don't push them anymore. I took one of the shingles vaccine, felt horrible, so decided not to take the second one. Your body has a tremendous way of fighting off infection if you're healthy. So I kind of push health, nutrition, vitamins, those type of things. Vitamin D was a lifesaver during COVID. We've got a lot of good natural stuff. Now I'm kind of a blend between traditional and natural. There's good on both sides, and certainly with COVID we had to use very high doses of steroids. We had to use budesonide nebulizers. We did a lot of things and pulled people out of the respiratory illness that we called COVID. There's no doubt in my mind it saved many lives.
And it woke you up, COVID, the whole thing.
Well, yeah, it really did make me realize that you can't just trust everything that you've been taught, because really a lot of it's about money, as you know. I mean, a lot of pushing towards vaccines, treatments that are expensive. And when you looked at the financial side of the hospitals and the millions and billions that these pharmaceutical companies were making with these newly RNA, mRNA vaccines, you just became very distrustful of the thing.
Well, I think it's wonderful that you are now on side, and his wife is behind us right now videoing as well, but you must be super proud of him. Very proud of him, yeah. Anything else you want to say?
No, just that, don't believe everything you hear. The vaccine in itself, we know it doesn't prevent COVID. It doesn't prevent transmission. And certainly, it certainly can have a lot of side effects. And I don't think it's going to kill everybody that takes it, but it's certainly, I've seen a lot of bad things happen because of it, and there's still a lot of unknowns. But I've just seen so many things that kind of opened my eyes. I was skeptical anyway. When you do functional medicine, you start to realize that they push too many medicines on people and don't look at some of the other things you should be doing.
Thank you. Thank you for sitting here, being brave, telling us all about it. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
46% of the American people say mandates are dangerous, they're damaging, and vaccine science isn't settled.
The steady decline of childhood vaccine rates. Vaccination rates continued to decline last year.
There's a discourse about vaccines that didn't exist before.
Children's health defense.
Children's health defense.
Children's health defense.
Children's health defense.
Children's health defense is the leader in the health freedom movement.
The Department of Health and Human Services is overhauling the immunization schedule,
now only recommending 11.
We are making recommendations that are science-based, that are common sense.
Secretary Hegseth, discarding the mandatory flu vaccine requirement.
Your body, your faith, and your convictions are not negotiable.
People recognize you have to be able to make an individualized decision.
For the first time, the U.S. FDA will acknowledge that COVID-19 vaccines killed American children.
States are putting in place medical freedom laws. There's bills in Congress that Children's Health Defense is supporting, the GRACE Act for the right to religious exemptions, the End the Vaccine Carve-Out, ending liability protection, and Tom Massey's bill to repeal the PrEP Act.
One of the most aggressive medical accountability lawsuits in decades.
Suing the American Academy of Pediatrics.
CHD is suing under RICO laws, claiming that the AAP operates as a criminal enterprise and has for decades.
A federal judge yesterday blocked Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s recent overhaul of the nation's childhood vaccine schedule.
They basically just froze all vaccine policy.
The American Academy of Pediatrics and other medical groups filed a lawsuit arguing the vaccine changes violated federal law.
Which is outrageous for a single judge sitting in Boston to stop any work at the Centers for Disease Control related to vaccines.
This conflict between medical freedom and medical coercion, it's a fundamental conflict that we must resolve now in favor of medical freedom or forever be truly slaves to medical tyranny.
I am so glad that there are people like you who are still fighting this.
Children's Health Defense. If you don't know what they do, folks, look it up.
We have got to, as a society, global, decide, is medical coercion okay, or do you have a right to decide what happens to your body?
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.